The first sign something was off came when I looked out my kitchen window and saw a trench being dug 3 feet into my backyard. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe the landscapers had the wrong address. But then I saw her. Charlene Brewster, head of the Oak Crest HOA and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac, standing there in her signature leopard print scarf and a clipboard so full of sticky notes it looked like a porcupine. She was barking orders at 2 guys in neon vests like she owned the whole zip code. I grabbed my boots and headed outside. "Charlene, why is there a shovel in my yard?" She didn't even flinch, just turned slowly and said, "Oh, hi, Sebastian. We're expanding the HOA community garden. It'll increase property values. You're welcome." I blinked. "That's my yard." "You can't just take part of my property." "Actually, we can," she said, flipping through her clipboard. "There was a vote. You missed the meeting. That doesn't give you the right to steal land." She rolled her eyes so hard I swear I heard them click. "It's not stealing, it's repurposing." "It's only 7 feet. 7 feet into my backyard. You weren't using it," she huffed. That night, I went through every inch of my property deed. I pulled up satellite images, walked out the boundary lines with a measuring tape, and marked everything. That land was mine. No easement, no shared space. Mine. So I did what any rational man would do. I sent the HOA a rent invoice. I mailed it certified. Charlene had to sign for it herself. I charged them a monthly rate based on local commercial garden rentals, plus retroactive fees for the 2 weeks they'd already been digging. Came out to $2,450. I even itemized it. The next day, Charlene was knocking on my door at 7:00 a.m., her bangs still in curlers. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, waving the invoice in my face. "Nope, you're using my land. Either pay rent or vacate. You can't charge rent to the HOA. You can't illegally seize private property, Charlene, but here we are." Her jaw clicked shut so fast I thought she chipped a molar. I installed a camera facing the garden plot that afternoon. I also put up small markers around the exact boundary line labeled "Private Property. Rent Due." Within 48 hours, she called an emergency HOA board meeting. It did not go how she planned. Charlene had reserved the church basement for the emergency HOA meeting, but she didn't anticipate half the neighborhood showing up. Word had gotten out. Apparently, my rent invoice had made its rounds after the HOA's treasurer, Dennis, accidentally forwarded it to the entire mailing list with a single panicked sentence. "Can he actually do this?" By the time I walked in, every folding chair was occupied. Even old man Foster from the corner lot was there, and he hadn't come to anything since 2009, when the HOA fined him for installing a weather vane shaped like a goose flipping the bird. Charlene stood at the front beside a whiteboard, arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. Her clipboard was gone. That alone said everything. I took a seat in the back. No need to be dramatic. The facts were already on my side. Charlene cleared her throat. "Let's begin. We're here to clarify a misunderstanding involving a small section of land behind Lot 17. A voice near the front cut in. "You mean Sebastian's yard?" She ignored it. "The board believed we were operating within legal bounds when we authorized the expansion of the community garden. However, due to a, let's say, discrepancy in documentation, the project has been paused." I raised my hand. "Is that why the trench is still open and my fence is still laying in pieces on the ground?" Murphy, the HOA's secretary, leaned toward his microphone. "We were going to put it back this week. Without permission or permits?" I asked. Charlene's knuckles whitened against the table. "That's irrelevant. The HOA exists to maintain standards and improve communal assets. So you're admitting you didn't have legal access to the land when construction began," I said, my voice calm. A few murmurs rippled through the room. Dennis adjusted his glasses and pulled a folder from his messenger bag. "Actually," he said, flipping through papers, "I've reviewed the parcel maps and county property records. Sebastian's right. The land wasn't part of the HOA's common areas. It's titled solely to him. If we did dig beyond the boundary line, we're liable. Charlene whipped toward him. You're not a lawyer. No, Dennis said, but my wife is, and she's not very happy about this. Someone laughed. It broke the tension like a pin through a balloon, and suddenly the room wasn't on her side anymore. I stood. So here's what we're going to do. You'll pay the rent as invoiced. You'll restore my fence at your cost, and you'll fill the trench. No more garden expansion. No more trespassing. And if I find so much as a gnome statue on my grass, I file a property damage claim and get the county involved. Charlene's voice cracked. You don't have the authority to dictate terms to the HOA. I took a piece of paper from my pocket and handed it to Dennis. This is the cease and desist letter I had notarized yesterday. It includes a clause for civil damages. I've also contacted the city zoning office and the county assessor. They're investigating now. Charlene's mouth opened but no sound came out. Murphy cleared his throat. I motion we table this discussion and vote to formally withdraw from the garden expansion project. Dennis looked up. Seconded, they voted. Only Charlene opposed. The motion passed. I left before the meeting ended. I had nothing more to say. The next morning, I watched from my deck as a landscaping crew arrived and began filling the trench. They moved quickly, almost sheepishly. By mid-afternoon, my yard was whole again, fence back up, markers undisturbed. But the real fun started 3 days later when I got a call from Officer Treadwell, a local cop I'd gone to high school with. He told me someone from the county zoning office had filed a report. Apparently, the HOA didn't just dig into my property, they'd done it without filing any permits. And more than that, the contractor they hired wasn't licensed for excavation work, which made the entire thing a double violation zoning and contractor fraud. Want to press charges? Treadwell asked. I plan to, I said. I filed the complaint that afternoon. It didn't take long for the city to act. The contractor was fined. But the larger fallout came from the HOA's own bylaws. Turns out, the rules required all major expenditures over $5,000 to be approved by a full vote of the residents. Charlene had bypassed that vote. She'd authorized the garden expansion on her own authority, citing emergency beautification needs. The board had rubber-stamped her decision without checking the books. Once the violation became public, several residents demanded a full audit of the HOA's finances. Dennis, now thoroughly disillusioned, agreed to conduct it. What he found turned the neighborhood upside down. Over the past year, Charlene had authorized over $20,000 in discretionary spending, none of it voted on. Decorative lamp posts for her block. A holiday lighting consultant who turned out to be her nephew. And nearly $4,000 in event planning fees for a 4th of July barbecue that was canceled due to rain. The worst part. The HOA's reserve fund had dropped below the legal threshold required by the state. They were on the verge of defaulting on their own insurance policy. Residents were furious. People started knocking on doors, organizing informal meetings, even drafting petitions. Within 2 weeks, over 60% of the neighborhood had signed a demand for a recall election. Charlene tried to rally her usual supporters, but the damage was done. The invoices, the missing vote records, the permit violations, it was all documented. And I made sure every sheet of it was scanned and emailed to each homeowner in a tidy, bookmarked PDF labeled HOA misconduct evidence. The recall election happened on a rainy Thursday evening. People showed up with umbrellas and clipboards, some wearing stickers that said, "Take back Oak Crest." When the votes were counted, Charlene was removed by a landslide. So were Murphy and 2 other board members. Dennis stayed on, but only after publicly apologizing and agreeing to install monthly public financial reports. He even suggested rotating town hall meetings to make sure no one person ever had too much influence again. I didn't run for the board, I had no interest in politics. But I did agree to serve as a consultant to the new treasurer, helping review financial procedures and property boundaries. I even drafted a new clause in the bylaws requiring resident approval before any land use decision could be made. The best part. The HOA had to dip into the remaining reserve fund to pay me the full amount from my invoice, plus legal fees. They cut the check quietly. No ceremony, no apology, but I didn't need one, because 2 weeks later I got a handwritten note from one of my elderly neighbors. It read, "Thank you for standing up. We didn't know we could say no." That made it worth it. Every form filed, every late-night boundary line check, every minute of watching Charlene squirm under the weight of her own arrogance. Oak Crest changed after that, not overnight but steadily. People started speaking up more, meetings got livelier, decisions got questioned, and Charlene, she sold her house and moved to a gated community across town, no garden expansions there. 2 weeks after Charlene's ousting, the neighborhood felt lighter. Kids rode their bikes without being chased down for not wearing reflective vests. People started putting out garden gnomes again tastefully, but defiantly. The new board held their first open forum in the community park, with folding chairs, donuts from a local bakery, and a microphone that actually worked. I'd barely sat down when Dennis approached, holding a thin manila folder. His shirt was untucked and he looked like he hadn't slept. He didn't ask if he could sit, he just dropped into the chair next to me with a quiet thud. "You've got to see this," he said, sliding the folder into my lap. I flipped it open and scanned the first page. It was a vendor ledger entry after entry listing payments to a company I didn't recognize, Bluefield Environmental Solutions. "Never heard of them," I said. "Neither had I," he muttered. Until I followed the routing number on the payment receipts. Guess what bank account the funds were going to? I looked up. Charlene's cousin, lives in Nevada, not licensed for any of the services we supposedly paid for. I turned another page. The descriptions were vague: land remediation, soil stabilization, organic pest control, but the amounts were anything but small. 2,000 here, 3,500 there. Over a span of 8 months, Bluefield had billed the HOA for nearly $24,000. "And here's the real kicker," Dennis added. "These charges started 3 months before she even proposed the garden expansion." My stomach turned. "So the whole project was a front," he nodded. "She'd already started funneling money." "The garden was just the excuse to keep it going." I raised an eyebrow. "You reported this." "Not yet," he said. "I wanted to make sure I wasn't overreacting or missing something." "You're not." We brought the folder to the new HOA president, a retired school principal named Marcia Linwood. She had the calm demeanor of someone who'd broken up 1,000 middle school fights, and the moment she saw the documents, her jaw tightened like a vice grip. "Get me copies," she said. "Then report it to the police." Now, by the following afternoon, a detective from the Financial Crimes Division was knocking on my door. Officer Treadwell had apparently passed along word of the earlier permit violations, and now they were digging deeper. I handed them everything: copies of the vendor payments, the routing confirmations, even a packet of board meeting minutes that showed Charlene had never disclosed her family ties to the company. 2 days later, Charlene was arrested. The charges weren't light: fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and misappropriation of HOA funds under state statute. The news spread fast, especially after the local paper ran a headline that read, "Former HOA president accused of embezzling funds through fake gardening company." At the arraignment, she showed up with a high-profile attorney and a silk scarf twice as loud as her usual ones. She pled not guilty, of course, but the judge denied her bail. Too many financial entanglements, too much risk of fleeing. The neighborhood was buzzing. Some were shocked, others vindicated. But everyone agreed on one thing: the HOA had become a cautionary tale. The new board wasted no time implementing safeguards. They hired an independent auditor to review the past 3 years of finances. What they found made Dennis's discovery look like pocket change. There were unauthorized bonuses paid to former board members, missing receipts for landscaping jobs that had never been completed, and even a mysterious beautification grant that had vanished into a personal PayPal account. The final tally, just over $82,000 unaccounted for. Marcia called an emergency general assembly in the gymnasium of the local elementary school. Folding chairs again, but this time the tone was different. No denial, no sugarcoating. "We will recover every cent," she promised. "And we will make whoever did this answer for it." The board filed a civil suit against Charlene and 2 of the former board members. It wasn't just about restitution, it was about setting a precedent. They also reported the misuse of insurance funds to the State Regulatory Commission, which launched its own investigation. Turns out, the HOA had been underinsured for over a year due to falsified paperwork Charlene had submitted. The fallout was massive. Homeowner dues had to be frozen while the board stabilized the budget. Emergency repairs were postponed, but no one complained. They understood. For the first time in a long time, people trusted the board to do the right thing. Meanwhile, I returned to my normal routine. I rebuilt the section of my backyard, reseeded the grass, and planted a couple of raised beds. Nothing fancy, just tomatoes and peppers. I even found a rusted garden gnome at a yard sale, cleaned it up, and gave it a spot near the fence line. A small reminder. One evening, as I was watering the plants, Dennis stopped by again. This time he didn't have a folder, just 2 bottles of root beer and a tired but real grin. "You probably saved this place," he said. I shook my head. "I just wanted my yard back." "Yeah, well," he said, handing me a bottle, "you got that, and a whole lot more." The civil trial dragged on for months. Charlene's lawyer tried every trick in the book, blaming the treasurer, blaming accounting errors, even suggesting that the payments to Bluefield were alternative vendor arrangements meant to avoid inflation. None of it held up. The prosecution had bank records, forged invoices, and even a whistleblower. A former board assistant who'd resigned after Charlene pressured her to backdate meeting minutes. Her testimony sealed it. Charlene was found liable for the full amount plus punitive damages. Her house was seized and sold at auction. The funds went straight into the HOA's emergency reserve account. The judge was blunt in his ruling. This was not a mistake, it was a carefully orchestrated abuse of power. The HOA recovered, slowly then steadily. The new treasurer implemented monthly transparency reports posted online and a rotating audit committee made up of volunteers. Every dollar was accounted for. Every vote documented. Marcia insisted on term limits for all board positions, no exceptions. And a new clause was added to the charter. Any project involving common property or homeowner land must be approved by at least 2/3 of residents in writing. As for me, I stayed on as a consultant for exactly 6 months, then stepped away. I didn't want power, just peace. But sometimes, when I'm sitting on my back deck with a cold drink and the sun dipping behind the trees, I look at that little garden and remember how close we came to losing more than just a few feet of land. We almost lost our voice, and then we took it back. The early fall air was crisp, and a quiet stillness had settled over Oak Crest. For the first time in a year, there were no unannounced inspections, no surprise fines, and no mysterious contractors showing up to evaluate soil suitability. The HOA was no longer a looming threat, it was a work in progress, transparent and answerable. I had just finished laying mulch around the vegetable beds when a dark green SUV rolled slowly down the street and came to a stop in front of my driveway. 2 men stepped out, one in a gray blazer with a leather folder in hand, the other in a black windbreaker with the emblem of the state attorney general's office stitched across the chest. The taller one with the folder approached first. His tone was formal but polite. "Mr. Halpern." "I'm Assistant Attorney Whitmore. We're following up on materials submitted regarding HOA funds and interstate financial activity. Do you have a moment?" I led them to the porch. They didn't sit. Instead, The agent in the windbreaker opened a binder and began flipping through documents I recognized from the civil proceedings. Only these were stamped with state seals and federal exhibit numbers. "We've uncovered additional financial inconsistencies tied to former HOA President Charlene Brewster," Whitmore said. Some of the invoices sent to Bluefield Environmental Solutions were routed through shell corporations registered in Delaware and then wired to foreign accounts. "We believe this may constitute federal wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion." I kept quiet, letting them continue. The total volume of funds moved through those accounts exceeds $120,000. That's significantly higher than what was disclosed in the civil trial. "And you're sure it originated from Oak Crest?" I asked. Whitmore nodded. "All the funds originated from HOA dues collected over the last 3 years. The board appears to have been unaware of the full extent, but Charlene orchestrated the scheme using falsified board minutes and forged expense authorizations." The agent in the windbreaker added, "We've issued a warrant for her communications, emails, texts, even burner phone records. Her cousin in Nevada, he's already agreed to testify against her to avoid prosecution." I leaned against the porch railing. "So what happens now?" "She's facing federal charges," Whitmore said. "We've coordinated with the IRS and the U.S. Attorney's Office. She'll be extradited to face trial in district court. We're also pursuing asset forfeiture, her properties, her accounts, everything tied to the scheme." "She's done," the other agent said bluntly. It was surreal. "When I'd sent that invoice months ago, I just wanted my fence rebuilt and my land left alone. Now the state was unraveling a criminal enterprise that had siphoned funds through an entire neighborhood. By the end of the week, Charlene had been transferred into federal custody. Her attorney attempted to delay the proceedings, citing medical concerns, but the judge ruled against her. During the preliminary hearing, prosecutors laid out their case: a web of deceit involving dummy vendors, digitally altered invoices, and multiple wire transfers routed through holding companies. It was airtight. The trial was scheduled for the following month. Meanwhile, Oak Crest was undergoing a different kind of transformation. The board, under Marcia's leadership, opened every meeting to residents and published all financial activity in real time via a secure online portal. They even held a weekend workshop on HOA rights and homeowner protections, hosted at the community library. I was asked to speak at the end of the session not as a board member, but as someone who'd stood firm when the system tried to bulldoze over him. I kept it short. "I didn't fight because I wanted control," I said. "I fought because no one should have to choose between standing their ground and being left in the dark. We all deserve to know where our money's going, what decisions are being made in our name, and who's really in charge." That earned a quiet round of applause. Afterward, a few neighbors came up to share stories how they'd been fined without due process, how their complaints had been ignored, how they'd assumed nothing could be done. One woman, a night shift nurse named Tanya from the east end of the development, told me she'd been threatened with a lien last year for painting her door a shade too dark. "They said it violated aesthetic continuity," she said, rolling her eyes. "Turns out that color wasn't even on the restricted list. They just didn't like it." I laughed and gave her the contact info for a legal advocacy group that had helped me early on, just in case they pull anything in the future. On the day of Charlene's federal trial, I sat in the back row of the courtroom. She wore a gray suit and a look of stone-faced defiance, but the evidence was overwhelming. Screens showed the bank records, the offshore account statements, even internal messages where she instructed her cousin to scrub details before forwarding invoices to Dennis. The defense tried to argue that she was merely careless, but the prosecution countered with forensic accounting and expert testimony that made it clear this wasn't sloppiness. It was a scheme. The jury deliberated for under 4 hours, guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution. The judge didn't mince words. You used your position to enrich yourself with money entrusted by your neighbors. That betrayal carries consequences. After the sentencing, I walked out into the cool air and let it all settle in. The trench in my backyard, the rent invoice, the board meetings, the audits, it had all led to this. By winter, the neighborhood had stabilized. Marcia implemented a policy requiring all financial transactions to be co-signed by at least 2 board members and reviewed quarterly by an independent accountant. The HOA also adopted a new clause. Any proposal involving changes to private property lines would require notarized consent from affected homeowners, non-negotiable. Dennis stepped down from the board after the audit cycle concluded. He left quietly, without ceremony, but with his integrity intact. The new treasurer was a retired IRS analyst named Gloria who wore cardigans with cartoon cats on them and kept a calculator on a chain around her neck. She didn't miss a single decimal. I returned fully to my routines. Repaired the last bit of fence, winterized the garden beds, put up a string of soft lights along the back deck. The gnome stayed right where it was. One evening, Tanya dropped by with a small gift, a jar of homemade salsa made from her late summer harvest. "Thought you'd appreciate something grown on land no one tried to steal," she said with a grin. I laughed and thanked her, then walked out to the backyard as the sun dipped behind the trees. The breeze was light, the air clean. No construction noise, no threats taped to the door, no strangers measuring my lawn with clipboards, just peace, the kind you have to earn.